Hello and welcome to the GRC Virtual Conference on Responsible Research Assessment and the panel on Funders' Research Assessment Criteria. This is a pre-recorded session that you can watch on demand. We're hoping that this will allow for global engagement regardless of where you are or what time zone you're in. The live Q&A session will take place on Tuesday, November 24th between 12 and 12:30 UTC. This is when our panelists will answer your questions. You can submit your questions either ahead of time or live during the Q&A session. My name is Stephanie Haustein, and I'm honored to be chairing this panel. Before we get started, allow me to introduce myself. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Information Studies at the University of Ottawa in Canada. My research focuses on scholarly communication, research evaluation and assessment, and open science using bibliometrics and mixed research methods. I also co-direct the Scholarly Communications Lab at the University of Ottawa and Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. The SCOCOM Lab brings together an interdisciplinary team of researchers interested in all aspects of scholarly communication. I have the pleasure today to introduce a stellar group of panelists: Dr. Becker from the German Research Foundation, Dr. Li from the National Natural Science Foundation of China, and Dr. Mello from the Sao Paulo Research Foundation. Professor Dr. Katja Becker is president of the German Research Foundation DFG. She is professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of Gießen. Dr. Becker is also a member of Leopoldina, Germany's National Academy of Sciences. Professor Dr. Li Jing is president of the National Natural Science Foundation of China, NSFC, and Vice President of the International Science Council. His academic background is in chemistry, engineering, and complex systems. Professor Dr. Luis Eugenio Araújo de Moraes Melo is the Scientific Director of the Sao Paulo Research Foundation, FAPESP. His background is in medicine, molecular biology, and physiology. He specializes in neuroplasticity, epilepsy, neurodegeneration, and science and technology management. Dr. Mello is a member of the Sao Paulo State Academy of Sciences and the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. On the panel, Dr. Becker, Dr. Li, and Dr. Mello will discuss their perspectives on research assessment criteria. For example, as part of the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology, NSFC recently adapted their research assessment criteria, moving away from the journal impact factor, which I'm sure Dr. Li will talk about. The aim of the panel is to address the opportunities and challenges that research funders face when setting the criteria for research assessments and to explore principles for criteria setting which can support responsible research assessment. We have asked our panelists to provide their perspectives on the following discussion points. We wanted to know how they as funders ensure that their assessment criteria are transparent. For example, what are their definitions of excellence? We wanted to know how they assess the content or substance of the research being assessed rather than any kind of quantity. We also wanted to know how they avoid using proxy measures which do not reflect the quality or the particular values of the funding agencies. We are also interested in the extent to which funders consider a variety of research contributions and outputs beyond the published paper. For example, do they value and assess research data sharing or knowledge mobilization outside of academia? Other discussion points include how funders' assessment criteria consider differences in mission or discipline, or how they ensure that their assessment criteria support equality, diversity, and inclusion. We also wondered what challenges funders face when they develop responsible criteria and how this differed by type of assessment. Finally, we asked funders to address how they assessed interdisciplinary research. The organizers have also kindly allowed me to provide my perspective on funders' research assessment criteria. As a researcher analyzing research evaluation practices, mostly from a quantitative perspective, I can't reiterate enough the importance of a mixed method approach, and that quantitative measures can only serve as a complement to any kind of qualitative expert or peer evaluation. But if you do want to use scholarly metrics, I kind of want to give you a quick run through of the do's and don'ts of using scholarly metrics. So if you are a funder and you want to use quantitative measures in research evaluation, you have to be really clear about the aim and meaning of each indicator and what precisely you want to measure. Just saying that you would like to honor or reward the most impactful researcher does not really work. You really need to define what impact means. It's also really important to use relative measures and not absolute numbers. So for example, percentiles instead of averages or instead of absolute values. And it's really, really important to normalize for disciplinary differences. We know that researchers from the natural sciences and engineering have very different cultures and ways to publish and cite each other than they do in the humanities or social sciences. So it's really important to use field normalized metrics that account for those differences. It's really important to provide context and benchmarks for each of your measures. Just having raw numbers don't mean anything. And finally, I think it's really important that you are transparent about any kind of methods of data collection and analysis that you use to assess research proposals or researchers. Because it really makes a difference what kind of database you use and what kind of indicators. And finally, from a really, really long list of don'ts, I selected a few that I think that are most important to consider when using bibliometrics or other quantitative indicators. It's really important to not use just one number and try to reduce a researcher's success or the potential of a research project to that one number. And hand in hand with that goes that you shouldn't be relying on very flawed and simplistic measures that unfortunately are way too popular and too often used in the context of research assessment. And I'm talking about indicators such as the impact factor here that we know has been misused and unfortunately still is misused by applying an average of a citation rate for a journal to an individual paper. The impact factor also lacks any kind of field normalization, which is really problematic. Fortunately, now we do have initiatives like DORA, for example, that push against the use of the journal impact factor in research evaluation, but we still see it being used way too often. And hand in hand with that goes also the use of the age index, which is really a flawed indicator that kind of arbitrarily tries to combine the number of publications and citations. Also avoid using any kind of composite indicators that try to mix different aspects and different dimensions of scholarly output and impact into one thing. So I'm talking about things like the ResearchGate score here, for example. They are very intransparent and it's really unclear in the end what the final number means. And along these lines, also stop using any kind of rankings. They are mostly, university rankings are mostly arbitrary measures and are not very transparent or fair. So I'm talking about the very famous Times Higher Education ranking or the Shanghai ranking. But actually most university rankings have the same kind of flaws, that they're trying to combine a number of arbitrary rankings into one number, which in the end doesn't really tell us anything. So this is really, in a nutshell, from my perspective, the do's and don'ts of using quantitative measures in research evaluation. But again, I would like to emphasize that they can only be used in complementary to expert evaluations and assessing the content and the quality of proposals and researchers' projects. So thank you very much for listening to this introduction. Now I hope you will take some time to hear our panelists, and I also hope that you can join us live for the Q&A session on Tuesday, November 24th between 12 and 12:30 UTC. Don't forget to submit your questions either ahead of time, or you can also post them during the Q&A session live. Thank you very much. See you there. Bye.
Dear friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the organizers for setting up this important and wonderful conference and bringing it to life in these unusual circumstances with a wide audience and excellent participants. I very gladly accept the invitation to this panel on funders' research assessment criteria, and I am happy to contribute with a message from the German Research Foundation, the DFG. The very founding of the DFG was and is dedicated to foster scientific curiosity and ensure that the funding solely relies on the scientific argument. While the DFG offers a broad portfolio, both for individual projects and coordinated programs, including the Excellence Strategy, the basic criteria for the assessment of proposals are the same across the board. It is the scientific quality of any proposal, its originality and its prospective scientific impact. This principle directly links to the DFG's mission to support the best possible framework condition for the benefit of the best research. In their asking for funding, the applicants are free to describe whatever they deem to be necessary for their endeavors. Now, I would like to go a little beyond the description of a mere overview of the funding programs and introduce you to a system that embeds the kind of research assessment conducted by the DFG. It is an obvious challenge to follow and maintain the funding principles of the DFG in an expanded and complex world of science, with increasing political impact expectations assigned to quantitative indicators and intricate rating mechanisms, leading to growing pressures for both applicants and funders' decision-making. The answer is by taking responsible care for research in all its broadness and diversity, and by taking care of the quality assurance that an honest research culture calls for. In turn, it means that the DFG continuously works towards sharpening the criterion of scientific quality within its research assessment procedures and processes. Functionally, the overall setup of the DFG as a self-governing institution for research and science matches the goal of science-driven decisions. The process from review to funding comprises 3 independent steps. The careful selection of reviewers tailored to each proposal, asking them to comment on the quality of the project, objectives and work program, the applicant's qualifications and the work and research environment. Second, the rating of the reviews by 49 review boards, which are elected by the scientific communities. Quite a unique feature globally. And lastly, the funding decisions by the Executive Committee, which comprises the Scientific Senate and the federal and states governments, overseeing both positive and negative recommendations, are made in a competitive process in favor of the best scientific projects across the entire range of all research areas. In each of these steps, the responsible members of the respective committees present a thorough argumentation on scientific grounds. As to criteria referring to publications, numbers placed in relevant journals, DFG treats them specifically in the sense that DFG has an explicit rule of quality over quantity. Moreover, DFG also has a clear and liberal policy to accept all different kinds of output formats in order to reduce predominant judgments while assuring the quality of diverse publication channels in the assessment. Of course, this is a highly discursive and sometimes long procedure, and I anticipate questions regarding cost effectiveness. Indeed, DFG invests much effort into what may truly be stated to be its core, a responsible research assessment. Research assessment can happen in different ways. The current debate on this topic ranges from quite sophisticated models of peer review to algorithmic replacements. DFG has always focused its research assessments to the scientific contents of its proposals. Metrical surrogates have been clearly limited to complementary use at best. The DFG clearly relies on the strength of peer review for assessing its proposals and is motivated by ensuring high-quality standards fit to the aims of any proposal, including the impeccable and personal yet unbiased knowledge management by a dedicated academic staff. Moreover, we invest time into a dynamic process of reflection on different approaches and tensions within the science system regarding research assessment, and we engage in active debates on the question of rating research proposals both ex ante and ex post. Due to the DFG's multi-layered scientific representation and its membership, research universities, and the immediate political dialogue, this process has a solid interdisciplinary response. Speaking of the ex post assessment of DFG-funded projects, it acknowledges possible failures of funded projects in a differentiated manner. Scientific failures, and considering them, are essential for scientific progress, and they should not be taken as a bias criterion for further awards. One important debate on these grounds, led by DFG's commitment for a global research culture from a holistic perspective, resulted in the publication of the Dfg Code of Conduct. The Dfg Code of Conduct is not a list of demands that can simply be ticked off. It is an explanatory tour de raison guiding the members of the scientific system, the institutions that embed them, as well as the public, to responsible research and the responsibility of those who are in charge of assessment and funding. The principles of good scientific practice include the entire range of responsibilities, from professional ethics and integrity to the responsibilities for academic leadership, scientific careers, and their environments for the future. By presenting this reasoning to you, I hope that I could convey the essence of the DFG's framework that applies to every step of research assessment in each module of our portfolio. Finally, and following from this, research assessment at DFG fundamentally respects the factor that drives doing, assessing, and rewarding outstanding research. And this is humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jing Heili from National Science Foundation of China. I would like to share some viewpoint with you on research assessment. I believe it is one of the most important issues for our funding agencies. First point I would like to talk is category-specific review. Generally speaking, we have general criteria for different types of proposals. For instance, scientific values, creative ideas, expected outcome, potential impact, feasibilities of the research plan, and applicants' academic background and many others. However, for different type of proposals, for different categories of researchers, these categories are not sufficient, we believe. For instance, we identify 4 different kinds of priorities of research, and we try to encourage these 4 categories of research or proposals. The first is breaking ground, for instance, the relativities series. The second is extending frontiers in science, for instance, LED blue light. And the third one is solving challenging problems or application-oriented research. And the last one is crossing disciplines, that is transdisciplinary or convergent research, such as artificial intelligence, which is involved by different disciplines and also different engineering fields. So it's really transdisciplinary issues. For different categories of research, we need totally different criteria. For instance, for the breaking ground research, we should emphasize originalities. And for extending frontiers, we should all pay attention to whether or not it is uniqueness. And for the solving challenging problems, we should know whether or not it is focusing on the really technical bottleneck. And for the transdisciplinary research, it should be problem-oriented first, and then we should know whether or not it is organized in an interdisciplinary way. So this gives our possibilities to identify reasonably the excellent research. This year, we have 44% proposals are evaluated in this way, and the feedback from the applicants are very encouraging. The second point I would like to discuss peer review featuring responsibility, credibility, and contribution. We call it RCC mechanism in review process. So we follow the logic. The logic is such as this. The review should encourage to pay their credibilities, to pay attention to their credibilities. And for that gives driving force for the reviews to perform responsible review and make contribution. So then responsibility and contribution rewarding the credibility of the review. So this is the logic. And we also have different indicators for the credibility, responsibility, and contribution. For instance, if the review have misconduct, that gives records of the misconduct, records of the impartiality issues in review, and they lose credibility. And also for the attitude and fairness in review process, and for the contribution to the funders and contribution to applicants, in addition to the evaluation, and sometimes the review also can make contribution to the proposals. So we believe responsibility, contribution, and credibility, such a logic is very important. So we tested this review mechanism this year, and then we collect the feedback from more than 12,000 applicants. This gives you the evaluation. We can see all of the more than 50% applicants appreciate this mechanism, and they believe very helpful, and more than 30 for helpful. And but if you clarify the applicant found it and the applicant not found it, that makes difference. The applicant found it, praise it very much, and the applicant not found it, praise it less. So this is reasonable. But anyway, more than 85% applicants appreciate such a mechanism, and so we will continue this practice in the following years. And lastly, I would like to discuss a little bit paradigm shift of science related to transdisciplinarity. And the paradigm shift is not only data intensive, but we believe the changes in research content, methods, and domain happened in recent years. For instance, research content will shift from static average to dynamic structure, from local phenomena to system behavior. The domain will shift from detailed analysis and to scale correlation, and from traditional theories to complexity size, and so on. And if we keep the traditional paradigm, the opportunity to make breakthrough will become less and less, and therefore we should looking for what is a new paradigm that gives more and more opportunity to make breakthrough. So promoting the paradigm shift and carry out transdisciplinary research, we need to analyze the logic and landscape of knowledge system. And according to this logic and landscape, we are planning a new funding system, reconstruct our funding system. And this diagram shows, for the different scales of circle, and that gives disciplinary knowledge such as physics, chemistry, and engineering, earth, space, and astronomy, and so on. So, and on the other hand, the radiative line gives different applied knowledge at different engineering fields, such as energy, material, information, traffic and transportation, agriculture, and so on. And the intersection between the engineering field, applied knowledge, and discipline knowledge at different level gives knowledge domain. So each intersection between discipline knowledge and applied knowledge gives a knowledge domain. Each domain consists of a specific level of discipline knowledge and a specific area of application, and also application of the general knowledge in this domain. So we can construct or reorganize our application and evaluation, and also all of review according to the knowledge domain. Each review have their appropriate knowledge domain, and each proposal also have a knowledge domain. So that gives good matchment between reviews and proposals. And lastly, in the middle, we have general knowledge. So we have existing knowledge, and of course, it will be further expanded. And in another hand, the most important is at different level, we have missing link. Now we have existing knowledge, which is multi-level, multi-scale, and we know much about element scale and system behavior. However, we have missing links between these two, between element and systems. So that means the dynamic structure between element and system still are big challenges, which are order and disorder together. And this means convergence of reductionism and holism is critical for the future knowledge expanding. And we have to make correlation between element details and system behavior at each level, and we have further make correlation between different levels. That probably gives common principles for the complexity and, of course, with diversity. So this is very important to promote the transdisciplinary research in this way. This is the common challenges. Thank you very much for your attention. I would have your comments and suggestions, and in the future we can have face-to-face discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Luiz Eugênio Melo, the Scientific Director of FAPESP, the São Paulo Research Foundation in the state of São Paulo, Brazil. The São Paulo Research Foundation, FAPESP, is a public foundation that supports research in all fields of knowledge. All proposals are peer-reviewed by external reviewers, followed by an internal committee assessment with the help of area panels composed of active researchers. FAPESP is a research funding agency and not a research performing agency. In 2019, FAPESP did fund almost 25,000 research proposals, including grants and fellowships. The funding lines may be classified in bottom-up programs and top-down or induced programs. Bottom-up programs comprise research grants and fellowships, as well as initiatives to support international research collaborations. FAPESP funds fellowships for both graduate and undergraduate students, as well as short and long-term research grants. We do support research in small businesses and technological innovation programs for industry, which are part of the existing funding portfolio. Top-down initiatives include programs on biodiversity, bioenergy, global climate change, e-science, and open science. On the following minutes, I will address the assessment process we use at FAPESP, the assessment criteria, considerations on EDI, and finally, consideration on open access and open science. I will now go on to present the assessment process. And this will be divided on 3 topics: general remarks, documents for proposals evaluation, and levels of the evaluation process. All of the projects at FAPESP are peer-reviewed. The scientific directorate at FAPESP analyzes not only proposals, but also ongoing project reports, usually on an annual basis. Bottom-up proposals may be submitted any time of the year. With the aim at training reviewers, FAPESP can request reviews from postdoc researchers who are recipient of FAPESP fellowships and are called on to analyze less demanding proposals, such as fellowships for undergraduate students. In FAPESP assessment process, proponents do not suggest reviewers upon submitting their proposals. For postdoc fellowships, the applicant is supposed to present a career development plan agreed with the supervisor. The wide range of programs led in 2019 to 23,000 peer reviews with the participation of 9,000 reviewers. The grants and fellowships are awarded by FAPESP to individual researchers, not to research institutions. Still in the assessment process, we have the documents for proposals evaluation. The proposals evaluation is mainly based on the research project, the budget required for its execution, the academic background of the proponent, a short academic bio, and the candidate's academic records in the case of fellowships. With regard to the assessment criteria, we of course follow a set of general criteria, which include transparency, accuracy of information, ethics and research integrity, impartiality, robustness of the assessment process, choice of reviewers, and conflict of interest. I'll now choose some of those topics, starting with transparency. FAPESP provides to applicants detailed guidelines available online, which contain the criteria used to assess all types of proposals. FAPESP provides detailed guidelines for individuals who will take part in the review process, either as individuals and/or as panel members. The forms that will be used to perform the assessment of the proposals are public. They express the concepts and criteria that will be used in the proposal's assessment. The names of all area, program, and supervising panels are public information available at the Foundation website. Ethics and research integrity. FAPESP published its Code of Good Scientific Practices in 2011. This code establishes ethical guidelines for the scientific activities of FAPESP research grant and fellowship beneficiaries, as well as for FAPESP advisors engaged in scientific evaluation. FAPESP believes that research institutions share responsibility with individual researchers to preserve scientific integrity in research. FAPESP requires research institutions to maintain research integrity offices responsible for promoting educational and training activities regarding good scientific practices, as well as for investigating and, if necessary, punishing scientific misconducts. With regard to impartiality, the Foundation provides training and guidelines in the process of identification of conflicts of interest, roles of reviewers for the area and supervising panels, and the importance of ensuring impartiality with respect to the evaluation of the research project. In all of FAPESP regular funding lines, proponents are guaranteed the right to request a new analysis of their proposals or request. This is called a request for decision review. Through the requests for decision reviews, FAPESP makes room for dialogue between the review system and the proponent. This possibility of asking for decision review is considered a quality factor in FAPESP's work. With regard to robustness of the assessment process, throughout the years, the Foundation has commissioned a series of studies to assess efficiency and robustness of our assessment process. This is an ongoing activity. With regard to conflict of interest, the area panel must follow international rules for selecting reviewers, which include current or past participation in projects, regular collaboration in research activities, advisor and supervisor-student relationship, and so on. Recently, the Foundation has implemented an automatic system following the rules described above to help choice of the reviewers by the area panels. Criteria for assessing the research proposal. In addition to the classical technical aspects that value science per se, societal and economic impact are used as criteria for project selection in calls that are related to innovation or public interest. With regard to the criteria for assessing the applicant, in addition to publication record, previously funded research, and other classical criteria, FAPESP has introduced a narrative CV, which allows the applicants to describe their professional experience and personal context. It is up to the applicants to choose which items in their CVs they wish to emphasize. With regard to social and EDI criteria, FAPESP has developed efforts to create an EDI-friendly research environment in which the following aspects may be highlighted. All bottom-up funding schemes receive applications anytime during the year. Studies have shown that setting strict due times tend to hurt women researchers disproportionately, as they are more likely to take on family caregiver roles that restrict their availability for writing proposals in certain periods. All scholarships are awarded jointly to the principal investigator and the student, allowing for a less strict hierarchy between supervisors and students. FAPESP Code of Conduct sets standards for mentorship. FAPESP grants 120 days of paid maternity leave for women holding any kind of FAPESP scholarship, 5-day paid paternity leave for men holding FAPESP scholarships. It also applies for women and men in cases of single-parent adoption or same-sex marriage, and also in case of stillbirth or death of an infant. Grants for research abroad include an allowance for accompanying spouse and children. FAPESP has used mass media to highlight women's contribution to research. FAPESP magazine has covered at least one gender-related topic in each issue in the last 6 years. With regard to open access and open science, I will highlight 3 initiatives. Cielo, the Scientific Electronic Library Online, Open Access Policy for Publications, and Data Management Plans. FAPESP understands that outputs of the research financed by the Foundation are a public good and must be made public as soon as possible, while respecting the principles of scientific ethics, privacy and security, as well as protection of intellectual property. In order to do that, FAPESP has launched a number of initiatives, including Cielo, Scientific Electronic Library Online, recognized as one of the most important open access programs in the world. Its publication model has been adopted by 15 countries, which compose the Cielo network of collections of open access periodicals. In the beginning of 2019, FAPESP formalized its open access policy for publications. Under this policy, all journal papers that result from FAPESP-funded research must be made publicly available via their publication in institutional open access repositories. At the end of 2017, FAPESP institutionalized the adoption of data management plans upon submission of project proposals. Such plans must describe the data that will be used and generated throughout the research, how this data will be made public, and how and for how long they will be preserved. I hope that this brief statement will help us to have fruitful discussions and exchange of experiences in the next few days. Thank you.
Hello and welcome everyone to this panel on funders' research assessment criteria. It's my honor to be hosting this live Q&A session today. My name is Stephanie Haustein and I'm be chairing this session. You have probably already watched the pre-recording of our panelists before, where they gave statements about how they are assessing and what kind of criteria they're using as research funders or representative of funding institution. So our panelists in the pre-recorded session was Dr. Katja Becker, who's the president of the German Research Foundation Dfg, Dr. Li Jinghai, the president of the National Natural Science Foundation in China, and Dr. Luis Eugenio Melo, the scientific director of the Sao Paulo Research Foundation, FAPESP. So today on the panel, I am really happy to welcome Dr. Li and Dr. Melo. Unfortunately, Dr. Becker couldn't make it, but we're still gonna be discussing a little bit about what she mentioned in the pre-recorded session. So if you haven't had time yet to have a look at that, I'll invite you to watch that session on demand. So I just wanted to get us started to quickly kind of try to summarize what our three panelists have already told us about in their pre-recording. So we heard from all three funders that there was a focus on qualitative assessment. So all of them use peer review or experts to evaluate and assess the quality of proposals submitted to their funding institutions. And this peer review, the peer reviewers would assess the potential merit of proposals. It was mostly done through external experts, but also sometimes academic staff. Dr. Becker particularly emphasized the importance of also selecting suitable reviewers and how important that is for the whole evaluation process. And Dr. Lee emphasized that the peer review reports also are deemed very helpful or helpful to the large majority of the funded and also the non-funded researchers. So they were actually assessing the way that they do the assessment. And there was a large focus on quality. Dr. Becker particularly emphasized that it's above all the research quality of the proposal that gets assessed by the DFG, mentioned that it sometimes comes at the cost of time and cost efficiency. And Dr. Mello mentioned also that researchers can actually submit narrative CVs where the researchers themselves choose kind of the important outputs and provide context and not just list the CV tabularly where you can maybe count the outputs. So there was really an emphasis on this quality. Quantitative measures were also used, but mostly as a complementary to the qualitative assessment. So examples included looking at the participants or applicants' CVs, looking at their publication output, for example, or previously acquired funding as a potential indicator to determine if they will be successful with the current funding. Dr. Becker here also mentioned that even if quantitative indicators are being used, that the DFG has an explicit rule over quality over quantity. There was also a strong emphasis on that criteria for assessment would be context dependent. So depending on what kind of proposals are being evaluated, different criteria might be assessed. And here Dr. Lee demonstrated that they use different criteria at NSFC's category-specific review. So for example, originality was the focus of the category called groundbreaking research. And Dr. Mello outlined also the variety of programs funded by FAPESP, from bottom up to top down, and also from undergraduate programs to research projects run by established researchers. And depending on that kind of context, the criteria and the assessment itself would also adapt. Dr. Lee also addressed a paradigm shift in research assessment that he thinks is really crucial, and he reported that this paradigm shift happened in research content, but also in the methods itself and the domain, and that this new paradigm would be particularly helpful to support the creation of breakthrough research. And he provided a complex logic model of how funders can promote this paradigm shift and actually help to support groundbreaking research. Dr. Mello particularly also expressed open science and open access, where we all know Brazil is a role model. Like, they have been doing open access for so much longer. And I think that's particularly those listening in Europe right now and facing Plan S can learn a lot from the Global South. And so he emphasized that FAPESP also had these kind of, or used open science and open access at FAPESP, and that research outputs are considered public goods. So they should be accessible by everyone and not blocked by a paywall. So at FAPESP, all journal articles need to be open access via Cielo. But he also addressed something in respect to research data management and data sharing, that data is also an output that should be freely available. Dr. Becker emphasized that the DFG also values all formats and kinds of research outputs, so not just the focus on journal articles. the research funders also addressed guidelines and codes of conduct. So most funders had a specific code of conduct to promote good research practices and ensure that research being done that they fund is ethical. And they also addressed the necessity to punish any kind of form of misconduct. And at FAPESP, we heard from Dr. Mello that assessment criteria are made public to ensure a transparent evaluation process, that they publish guidelines for both reviewers as well as applicants, and even allow a request for decision review if there's any kind of problem with how the research was assessed. And finally, what I heard was also that equity, diversity, and inclusion were really important. So Dr. Mello, for example, emphasized that they're trying to make up for gender imbalance, particularly, for example, supporting women in science, that they also support mentorship roles. And we also heard lots of the diversity of outputs and disciplines. So we heard a lot about interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity, and that there are different disciplinary cultures that we need to respect in the assessment as well. So this is my little summary of what I heard. And now I hope that we have lots of time and for questions so that Dr. Mello and Dr. Lee can respond to you directly.
Thanks. So we had a couple of questions come in on the recorded session. A couple asking how funders can support the integrity of research by encouraging the publication of negative results and reducing the risk of researchers producing false positive results to get themselves published in high impact journals.
Dr. Mello, Dr. Lee, who would like to start?
All right, we'll take this. It's a tough question, a good question, and it's not easy to address that topic. I think public repositories where you make available your preprint, it's definitely a way to go for negative results that may not find space on different journals. On the other hand, the full set of data might be made available on data repositories, and we're at FAPESP making a strong effort, a strong push in partnership with the main universities in the state of São Paulo. A data repository was set about 2 years ago, and specifically on that, for COVID, we launched an initiative that today contains an open access, and it's full data, over 10 million laboratory exams, data of over 300,000 patients, and that's all there and available for researchers worldwide to use that information. So it's both ways on either publishing negative results as it would be an article on a preprint repository, as well as on the complete data set.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, would you like to, how do you see negative results and publishing those?
No, excuse me, your question is concerning the open science? Huh?
It's about the publication of negative results. So to also publish something if it's not a positive outcome in terms of the hypothesis, to avoid duplication of research, for example.
Okay. Okay, it is a very complicated issue, and so everywhere and frequently we see such a phenomena, and I think for all agencies, the education is critical. Education is critical, and regulation is also very important. So we must have sufficient administrative regulation. And first, we have to educate our scientists what is right, what is wrong. And because, you know, for the young people, they don't know what is the right behavior. And sometimes they know nothing. And so at the beginning, we have education. And then we should show the regulation and what is the bottom line. And so that gives a warning line, and that cannot be touched. So finally, several steps, and so from the education, from regulation, and then the people know, try to regulate their behavior, and finally the regulated behavior becomes a habit, yeah, and then further the control. So when we have scientific control, we have good behavior. So that's the different levels of methods are very important. So that's my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a next question?
Yes, we have a couple of questions around about how you train your reviewers, how to take into account responsible research assessment criteria, so a broader definition of excellence, questions around about equality, diversity and inclusion. And then some follow-up questions about how you actually ensure that your reviewers follow these guidelines, and how you make sure that the research community has the confidence that they're following those guidelines as well. So those three questions together about training your panelists.
Okay, thank you. I think this question is for me. Okay, thank you. So we established the so-called RCC-based assessment mechanism, and that means all of the review process should follow the principle of responsibility, credibility, and also contribution. And we make an announcement when we invite the reviews. We send such explanation of the introduction to the RCC mechanism, so they know, or they are encouraged to increase their credibility. So now everyone pay attention to their own credibility. If they pay attention to the credibility, they have to follow the role and to carry out the responsible review and even the contribution. So we also take the contribution into account. And for instance, when the review the proposals and they contribute a very good idea, and this idea are accepted, acknowledged by the applicants. So that is a big contribution. So the contribution and responsible review feedback into the credibility. So that is the logic. So we design a logic and we have an indicator and so in the system. But such information is seriously confidential only for the review themselves, yeah, not for anybody. So, but and the indicator is just encouraging, and we give the positive value 0 to 10, and if you are good, you have the value 10, and if you are not so good, you have value 5, and if you contribute nothing, you have 0. So this is the encouraging mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Mello already mentioned that most of the guidelines about reviewers and training are public. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how the process works at FAPESP.
Thank you. As you mentioned, the guidelines are made available publicly, both to applicants and to reviewers. And we constantly discuss the quality of the reviewers, and we also grade them and divide into, let's say, different categories. But being aware of the need of training for reviewers to be formed as reviewers, we're currently devising a program for our postdoctoral fellows. So all of the recipients of FAPESP fellowships at the postdoctoral level are now being asked to contribute by reviewing fellowships for undergraduate students. So given its entry level of award, and with that, actually, we're devising a training program, both using aspects or both considering aspects of research integrity, but also on how to evaluate whether to praise originality or academic record and so on. So we're making an effort to form new reviewers and better reviewers.
Thank you very much, which speaks to what Dr. Lee also mentioned, that we have to train younger generations and early career researchers, not only in the research process itself, but also in the evaluation process, right? Thank you. Do we have another question?
Yes, there's a question about communication here and how you communicate the outcomes of reviews to unsuccessful applicants, whether you provide detailed feedback or whether it's just high-level feedback. And I think you've touched on quite a few of those, but just perhaps a bit more detail.
Dr. Mello, would you like to start?
Yeah. So we most often give the full report. So all of the aspects that were raised, both good and bad, are sent back to the applicant or interested party. And with that, actually, they may resubmit a revised version. And we see it as a sort of a training process as well, as we may make better proposals and correct some flaws. And many times those flaws are correctable. So it's a way of improving the system.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lee, can you say something to the extent of like what kind of feedback you provide to the applicants?
Okay, so you know, if the proposal is accepted, the feedback is very simple. Anyway, they are happy to know their proposal is accepted. But if the proposal is rejected, that is a very complicated issue. And we have to have a very nice letter and so very softly and written, and so make the applicants not so angry. And but we give the original comments from all of review to the applicants. So based on that, for instance, this year, we ask for the comments from the applicants. And in the PPT, my lecture, I showed that, you know, more than 20% of the applicants are satisfied with the review process. But it is also very interesting. There is difference between the applicants received funding and applicants who rejected. So this not so big difference, but anyway, is obviously different. the feedback are different.
And can I ask just, do you also have the process that the applicants that weren't successful could resubmit an improved version?
Yes, frequently.
Yeah.
Frequently. Yes.
Dr. Mello?
Yeah, I have just one point to add, which is one aspect of when an applicant has his or her project rejected, we see that he or she may be biased towards a more recent application by another colleague. So we also tend to take that into consideration by looking whether or not a current evaluator or reviewer has an existing project, ongoing project. And this, again, may provide a different perspective.
Thank you very much. And we move to the next question, if we have one.
Yes, we have a question on burden. So responsible research assessment is arguably more complex and more time consuming, as you can't use proxies to measure quality. So there's a question, I think Dr. Becker brought it up, about the cost to the funders and how you balance that with the benefits of responsible research assessment. And then we've also had a question about how you motivate responsible research assessment by researchers who are very, very busy, and how you help motivate them when there's that burden on their time.
Dr. Lee, can you speak to that? So like how much time reviewers take, and if that's the negative part of qualitative assessment, that it takes quite a lot of time. How do you motivate researchers as peer reviewers to provide substantial feedback?
Okay, thank you. This is also a critical issue for all of auditing agencies. And if we have not support from reviews, we have big problems. So we always keep the balance. We always keep a balance. But you know, the problems in science needs solutions which is scientific. So for that, I presented at my PPT, and we have 4 categories. You know, if we have 4 categories, and also for each category we have different criteria. So that makes much easy for the review, and particularly for each proposals, we have 1 page. We have 1 page at the beginning of the proposal, and this 1 page gives abstract at what is reason for your selected category and what is your originality and what's your uniqueness and so on. So that gives possibility for the review to save much time. So that's what we did.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mallow, how do you handle the balance between quality and not taking too much time?
So I think about 2 months ago, we completely revised all of our evaluation panels. We actually shortened them by half, and we hope that we will not lose quality and criteria. However, as with any change, we need time to evaluate whether or not this change was on the benefit of the reviewers in terms of time consumed. In terms of the burden to each reviewer, we have a computerized system to allocate reviewers, and we tend to balance on how many reviews we asked for a given reviewer on a given year. Of course, for let's say large calls for proposals, we then might go on a personal touch and myself, I would make a phone call and politely ask a distinguished senior researcher for him or her to provide, and please excuse us from asking much time and so on. So it goes on to a personal act by the agency.
Thank you very much. And maybe we have time for one last question.
Yes, there's a nice one here that the questions and answers so far have focused on grant applications and awards. If the panel could think about how these answers would be applicable to longer term assessments of research, also of individuals and of institutions as well.
So Dr. Malo, can you speak to that, keeping in mind that we have about 3 minutes left?
Yeah, I'm not sure I got the question right, so I apologize.
If I understood correctly, it's about that now we're talking so much about the individual proposals of granting that or not. But if you think that the criteria you're using for that assessment of individual research proposals for people or project would also be applicable to something longer term. So I understand that career level or institutions maybe in general. Yeah,
we actually, I think they do not apply. It's a different set of criteria that should be used. We have a number of programs, a program on biodiversity or a program on climate change. These should be evaluated by different criteria than those used for researchers or research lines.
And Dr. Lee, do you have a comment on that? So do you have something that you evaluate longer term and not just the individual proposal?
No, it's very difficult for funding agencies. You know, every year we have 270,000 proposals. You know, for so many proposals, it is difficult for us to have a long-time evaluation for the proposals. But now we try to solve these problems. And we try to have what's the so-called pre-application. And we intend to ask the applicants first, ask to proposals of 1 page, 1 or 2 page. So, and then from that, if the proposal is, the pre-proposals is accepted, we ask for the full applications. So that may be, we hope it will be effective.
Thank you very much. I think we're reaching the end of our panel. So thank you very much, Dr. Lee and Dr. Malo, for taking the time to answer the questions live today. And thank you everyone for listening and who attended. If you haven't had the time, I really encourage you to watch the on-demand session where Dr. Malo and Dr. Lee and also Dr. Becker went into a bit more detail. And thank you very much also to the conference organizers for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. If you have questions, you just send me email.